The courtroom was silent, every eye locked on the defense attorney, waiting for a response. But instead of speaking, he stayed calm, steady, and still. While across the aisle, the prosecutor wore a smirk, convinced the battle was already won. What followed would leave everyone in that room questioning everything they thought they knew. Scene 1. The atmosphere. It was the kind of courtroom that carried its own gravity. High ceilings, dark wooden panels, the hum of cameras outside the doors waiting for updates. This wasn't just any case. This was the case that had the city talking, the trial that felt less like a legal proceeding and more like theater. The air inside was tense, charged with an electricity that you could feel in your chest. Jurors leaned forward, gripping their notebooks, while spectators filled every seat, eager to witness history unfold. Reporters tapped furiously at their keyboards, ready to broadcast every word beyond those courtroom walls. And at the heart of it, all two figures. On one side, the prosecutor, sharp, confident, radiating arrogance. His suit crisp, his papers stacked in perfect order, he looked like a man convinced of victory before the gavel even struck. On the other side, the defense attorney, calm, collected, and curiously quiet. He hadn't spoken much that morning. Instead, he listened, observed, and waited like a chess player studying the board, holding his queen until the moment was right. Scene 2. The prosecutor's performance. The prosecutor stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate flair, and approached the jury. His tone was polished, his gestures rehearsed. This was his stage, and he knew it. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing through the chamber, "what we have here is not a mystery. It is not complicated. The facts are clear, the evidence undeniable, and the truth unmistakable." He paused, letting the words hang, watching jurors nod slightly. He paced like an actor, carefully choreographed. Then he turned toward the defense table and smirked. "This case," he continued, "is about accountability. And the man sitting there," he gestured toward the defendant, "cannot escape the facts." No matter how cleverly his lawyer might try to spin them, a ripple of chuckles moved through the audience. The prosecutor had landed his jab. He basked in the moment, convinced he had cornered his opponent. Scene 3. The smirk. The defense attorney remained seated. No flicker of irritation crossed his face, no sign that the jab had landed. Instead, he simply folded his hands and looked at the jury, calm, unwavering. But the prosecutor's smirk widened. To him, silence was weakness. He leaned harder into his performance, laying out piece after piece of evidence. Every chart was displayed with theatrical flair. Every witness statement was repeated with heavy emphasis. He didn't just argue the case, he painted a picture, complete with villains and victims, right and wrong. And with every line, he glanced at the defense attorney, waiting for a reaction. He got none. Scene 4. The audience reacts. Spectators shifted in their seats, some nodding along, others whispering. The prosecutor's confidence was infectious. The jury seemed attentive, drawn into the narrative. Reporters outside were already sketching headlines in their minds. Prosecutor dominates courtroom. Defense silent as evidence stacks up. Even the judge, typically stone-faced, raised an eyebrow at the prosecutor's relentless momentum. It looked, for all the world, like the defense was cornered, like the trial's outcome had already been written. And the prosecutor knew it. He returned to his table, sat down, and leaned back with that same smirk. To him, the day was already won. Scene 5. The calm before the storm. But what no one realized, what no one could see, was the quiet storm building across the aisle. The defense attorney hadn't been silent out of fear. He had been silent out of calculation. Every detail the prosecutor delivered, every supposed fact laid before the jury, he stored away like puzzle pieces. He was waiting for the right moment, the precise opening. He glanced at his client, nervous, shoulders tense, eyes darting between jurors. The defense attorney gave a small nod, a silent promise. "Trust me, it's coming." Scene 6. The cliffhanger. As the court prepared to break for a recess, the prosecutor adjusted his tie, stood again, and delivered one final blow. "And so, members of the jury," he said, "the defense may try to distract you, may try to twist words, but nothing can erase the truth you've just seen and heard. The evidence is overwhelming. The verdict, I trust, will be obvious." He sat, smug and satisfied. The audience murmured, convinced. The smirk on his face seemed carved in stone. All eyes turned toward the defense attorney. This was his moment to respond. But instead he simply rose, smoothed the front of his suit, and said, "Your Honor, if I may." The room went silent. The audience leaned forward. Even the prosecutor's smirk faltered just slightly. And in that moment you could feel it, the shift. Something was about to happen. Something that would make this trial unforgettable. But what came next wasn't just a rebuttal. It wasn't just a defense. It was a single comeback so precise, so devastating, that the entire courtroom and the prosecutor himself would be left speechless. The prosecutor thought he had built an unshakable wall of evidence, but the defense attorney had just found the crack that would make the whole structure crumble. Scene 1. The room holds its breath. The judge gave a small nod. "You may proceed, counselor." The defense attorney rose fully now, his movements unhurried, his expression calm. He picked up a single sheet of paper from the table knot, a stack, not a binder, not a mountain of exhibits. Just one sheet. The jurors noticed, the spectators noticed. Even the prosecutor noticed. He frowned, confused. Surely this couldn't be it. Surely this wasn't all the defense had to counter his mountain of evidence. The room was so quiet you could hear the creak of leather chairs as jurors leaned forward. Scene 2, the opening blow. The defense attorney began softly. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, his voice low but steady, "you have heard a great many words this morning. You have seen charts, statements, timelines, all arranged in a way that seems at first glance airtight." He paused, letting the silence expand. "But sometimes," he continued, raising the sheet in his hand, "all it takes is one truth, one undeniable fact to shatter an illusion." Gasps fluttered through the gallery. The prosecutor shifted in his seat. His smirk lingered, but it no longer looked so certain. Scene 3, the evidence twist. The defense attorney stepped closer to the jury box, holding the paper delicately between his fingers. "This," he said, "is a transcript. A transcript of the very witness the prosecution has leaned on most heavily in their argument. You remember the testimony? You saw the confidence with which the prosecutor presented it." He glanced at the prosecutor. "But what you were not told," he said, his voice sharpening, "is that this same witness, under oath, admitted to something the prosecution conveniently left out." He read the lines slowly, each word deliberate. "I cannot be certain. I only thought I saw him." The room exploded with murmurs. The jurors' eyes widened. The prosecution's star witness had admitted doubt-crippling doubt. The prosecutor shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is taken out of context." The judge raised a hand. "Overruled. The jury may consider the statement." The defense attorney folded the paper neatly and set it down. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need theatrics. The truth had already spoken louder than any performance. Scene 4, the crack widens. The jurors scribbled furiously in their notebooks. One leaned toward another, whispering with a look of surprise. The gallery buzzed with shock, and the prosecutor, his smirk was gone. He shifted in his seat, tugging at his collar, suddenly less comfortable in the role of victor. The defense attorney let the silence linger, letting the weight of the revelation settle. Then he stepped back, clasped his hands behind his back, and addressed the jury once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not about cleverness. This is not about who can speak louder or longer. This is about truth. And truth, as you can see, is often simpler and far more devastating than performance." Scene 5. The jury's reaction. Reporters in the gallery typed furiously. Defense attorney strikes first blow. Key witness doubt revealed. Outside, cameras caught snippets of whispered updates from those leaving the room during recess. Social media exploded with hashtags. Hashtag the comeback, hashtag speechless courtroom. The narrative had shifted. What had begun as the prosecutor's show now belonged to the defense attorney. Scene 6. The psychological battle. But the defense attorney wasn't done. He paced slowly, deliberately, like a teacher guiding a lesson. "You were told this case was simple. You were told it was undeniable. But you just heard that the most important witness admitted uncertainty. What else, I wonder, has been conveniently left out?" He turned toward the prosecutor, who sat stiffly, his jaw tight. Their eyes locked for just a moment. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't rage. It was something worse for the prosecutor. Pity. The defense attorney's calm pity said, "Everything, you've overplayed your hand." Scene 7. Setting the trap, the defense attorney picked up another paper this time, a timeline the prosecutor had displayed earlier. "Let us look again," he said, laying it before the jury. This timeline was presented as flawless. "But if you examine the records," he pointed to a small notation, "you will see a problem." He paused, giving the jurors time to lean in. "The witness claimed to have seen my client at 9:15 p.m., but this timestamp taken from verified surveillance shows my client entering his home at 9:07 p.m. Gasps, murmurs, a ripple of disbelief. The prosecutor leapt up again, red-faced. "Objection! That surveillance footage," the judge cut him off. "Overruled. The jury will consider the evidence." And with that, the second crack split the wall wide open. Scene 8. The audience turns, the crowd's energy shifted entirely. Where once they had nodded at the prosecutor, now they shook their heads, whispering disbelief at his oversight. The jury's eyes darted between the paper and the attorney, suspicion replacing certainty. The defense attorney let the moment breathe. He didn't gloat, he didn't shout. He simply allowed the truth to work, piece by piece, dismantling the mountain the prosecutor had built. Scene 9. The cliffhanger for Part 2 finally. The defense attorney returned to his table, picked up a glass of water, and took a slow sip. Then, setting it down, he looked directly at the jury and said, "If two of the prosecution's strongest points fall apart this easily, imagine what will happen when we look at the rest." The room erupted in whispers again, anticipation surging. And across the aisle, the prosecutor sat motionless, his smirk gone, his confidence shattered. But the real blow was yet to come, a single comeback so sharp, so undeniable, that even the judge would lean back in stunned silence. The cracks had appeared. But what came next wasn't just another strike, it was the knockout blow that left an entire courtroom speechless. Scene 1. Silence before the storm. The judge called the court back into session after a brief recess. The jury shuffled in, carrying fresh cups of water and notepads filled with scribbles. The gallery hummed with restless chatter. Everyone knew something was coming. The prosecutor adjusted his tie, determined to regain footing. He straightened his papers, forced a smile, and waited. The defense attorney stood, unhurried, calm. His posture radiated quiet confidence, not the kind born from arrogance, but from certainty. He had something no one else in that room had, the truth that could not be buried, and in moments he would use it. Scene 2. The trap springs. The defense attorney stepped into the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, "we've all heard the prosecution's story. But stories are fragile when they are built on assumption. Today I will not give you another story. I will give you something much harder to ignore." He walked to the evidence table and lifted a sealed envelope. The crinkle of paper echoed in the silent chamber. He handed it to the bailiff, who carried it to the judge. The judge examined the contents, then nodded, eyebrows raised in surprise. "Proceed," the judge said. The defense attorney turned back to the jury. "Inside this envelope," he explained, "is the original security log from the building the prosecution claims my client entered on the night in question. It is dated, it is signed, and it is certified." The prosecutor shifted uneasily, his smile faltering. The defense attorney's voice sharpened. "And it shows beyond a shadow of a doubt that my client was never there." Scene 3. The revelation, the gallery gasped. The jury leaned forward as the attorney laid the copy of the log on a projector screen. Names filled the list: visitors, arrivals, departures. Timestamps glowed in neat rows. He circled the crucial space where the prosecutor had insisted the client's name appeared. "Do you see?" he asked the jury. There was a pause, then nods. The name wasn't there. The log didn't lie. For the first time all trial, the prosecutor's face drained of color. He grabbed his own notes, flipping pages desperately, searching for something, anything that could explain it. But there was nothing. The truth was plain, undeniable, devastating. Scene 4. The smirk dies. The defense attorney walked slowly back to his table, then turned on his heel to face the jury again. "The prosecution built its case on witnesses who doubted their own memories," he said, voice steady as stone. "On timelines that collapse under scrutiny. And now on records that simply do not exist. He spread his hands, calm, final. "This is not justice, this is fiction," the room erupted. The gallery buzzed with shock. Reporters typed furiously, their fingers barely keeping up. Defense shatters prosecution with one document. Epic courtroom moment stuns judge and jury, and in that chaos everyone noticed the prosecutor's smirk, once so sure, so uncheckable, was gone. In its place sat the look of a man who knew the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Scene 5. The judge's reaction. The judge leaned back in his chair, adjusting his glasses. For a moment, even he seemed caught off guard by the sheer weight of the revelation. Judges were meant to be neutral, but even he couldn't disguise the look of surprise. "Ladies and gentlemen," the judge finally said, "you will disregard any prior claims about this record. What has been presented here is certified and admissible." The words struck like a gavel themselves. The prosecutor slumped slightly in his chair. The jury whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads. The gallery buzzed louder. "And the defense attorney?" He simply returned to his seat as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. That was the brilliance of it. No drama was needed. The truth was drama enough. Scene 6, the emotional punch, but he wasn't done. He rose once more, turning directly to the jury. His tone softened, the sharp edge replaced by something deeper, something human. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this isn't just about records or timelines. This is about a person's life. My client came into this courtroom accused, ridiculed, treated as though guilt was already decided. And yet, truth has a way of surviving. It may be buried beneath noise, but when uncovered, it speaks louder than any accusation." The jurors' faces softened. Some leaned back, considering his words. In that moment, the case was no longer numbers and exhibits. It was human. It was about fairness. Scene 7, the knockout line. And then came the sentence, the mic drop moment, the line that would echo far beyond the walls of that courtroom. The defense attorney paused, glanced once at the prosecutor, and then delivered it. "Justice," he said, voice clear and unwavering, "is not served by clever words or by confident smiles. Justice is served by facts. And the fact is, this case just collapsed." The silence that followed was electric. The jury sat frozen, the gallery gasped. Even the judge leaned back, lips pressed tightly together, as if holding back a reaction. The prosecutor buried his face in his notes, fumbling, stammering, but no words came. His voice, so commanding earlier, was gone. Scene 8, the viral moment outside the courthouse. Cameras caught people exiting the gallery, phones already in hand. Clips of the defense attorney's final sentence began flooding the internet within minutes. "Justice is served by facts" trended within the hour, memes appeared. Edits of the prosecutor's fading smirk circulated. Commentators on late-night shows replayed the clip again and again, and the jurors? They had seen it all with their own eyes. The prosecutor's mountain of evidence reduced to rubble. The defense attorney's calm truth standing tall in the wreckage. Scene 9, the cliffhanger ending, Part 3. Back inside, the judge called for order. The defense attorney sat down, folding his hands calmly on the table. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He had no need to. The entire courtroom already knew what had just happened. The prosecutor had lost control. The jury had seen the truth, and the defense attorney, through one sentence, had made history. Cliffhanger. But the story didn't end inside the courtroom walls. What happened next spread across the nation, changing not just the case, but the conversation about justice itself. One sentence had ended the debate, but its echoes were only just beginning. Scene 1, the verdict approaches. The day after the mic drop moment, the courthouse looked different. The steps outside were packed with cameras, reporters, and citizens waiting for updates. Overnight, the trial had transformed from a local case into a national spectacle. Inside, the jury filed into their deliberation room. Some carried serious expressions, others still shaken by what they had heard. The weight of truth pressed on their shoulders. The prosecutor sat hunched over his table, the fire gone from his eyes. He had presented everything he could, but it wasn't enough. He knew it. The gallery knew it. Even his own assistants whispered nervously, sensing the inevitable. The defense attorney, by contrast, was serene. He sat quietly with his client, reassuring them in low tones. It wasn't bravado, it was certainty. Scene 2, The whisper that grew outside the courthouse, a chant began. At first it was just a few voices, facts over fiction, facts over fiction. But soon the crowd joined in. The words echoed against the courthouse walls, a living embodiment of what had happened in the courtroom. The attorney's line had left the building and entered the streets. Commentators on the news repeated it. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended. People argued online, dissecting every detail, but one truth kept rising above the noise. The case had collapsed. Scene 3, the jury returns. Hours later, the bailiff announced the jury had reached a decision. The crowd hushed. Reporters stopped typing. Even the air seemed to freeze. The jurors filed back in, faces unreadable. The foreperson stood, holding the folded slip of paper. On the charge brought against the defendant, the foreperson read, "We, the jury, find." "Not guilty," gasps filled the room. The defendant's eyes welled with tears. The gallery erupted, some in cheers, others in disbelief. The prosecutor closed his eyes, shoulders sagging, defeated. The defense attorney placed a steady hand on his client's shoulder, nodding once. Not with triumph, but with quiet justice. Scene 4, the nation reacts. The verdict hit the airwaves like lightning. Within minutes, every news channel ran the headline. Defense attorney destroys case with epic comeback. Clips of the courtroom moment replayed endlessly. Analysts called it the most decisive turning point in recent legal history. Legal students studied it. Commentators debated it. But no one could deny the brilliance of the defense. Across the country, people quoted the attorney's words, "Justice is served by facts." And the fact is, this case just collapsed. It became more than a courtroom moment. It became a rallying cry. Scene 5. The human side amid the noise. One story stood out, the defendants. For weeks, they had lived under the shadow of accusation, their reputation tarnished, their future uncertain. But in one moment, everything shifted. They walked out of that courthouse free, not just in body, but in dignity. Tears streamed down their face as they hugged family outside the building. Reporters shouted questions, microphones shoved forward, but their words were simple. "I owe my life to the truth." And to the man who refused to let lies win, the crowd cheered. Scene 6. The prosecutor's silence, meanwhile. The prosecutor avoided the cameras. His once booming voice was gone, his confident posture broken. In private, whispers began about his career, about the risks of arrogance, about building cases on shaky ground. For him, the trial was over, but the shadow of that moment would follow him forever. Scene 7. The legend of the comeback. The defense attorney never bragged. He gave no fiery speeches outside, no self-congratulation. When asked about his epic comeback, he only smiled faintly and said, "I did what any servant of the law should do. I followed the facts." They were enough, but people remembered. Students of law studied the trial. Commentators replayed the footage for years. And the phrase "justice is served by facts" was etched into public memory. It was no longer just a line. It was a principle, a reminder of what the justice system should be. Scene 8. The final reflection. In the quiet after the storm, the defense attorney sat in his office, the noise of the world outside fading away. He thought about the trial, not the headlines, not the fame, but the truth. He had stood against the tide, against assumptions, against the easy narrative. And in the end, he had watched truth rise. That was the victory, not the applause. Not the cameras. The victory was justice itself. The closing line, mic drop number 2. And so, as the story spread far and wide, people remembered not the shouting, not the arguments, not the smirk of a fading prosecutor. They remembered the moment silence fell, and one voice spoke words that rang like a gavel. Justice is not served by clever words. Justice is served by facts, and with that history was made.